So here's where we left off. I was waiting for this thing to open, and it finally did. FAA has airport diagrams. You can look up the diagram basically for any airport. Whoop. You go back to that screen. Here we go. Go back. Essentially, you just type in the airport identifier and search. You don't even need the state if you know the airport identifier. Otherwise, you can do by, if you don't know the identifier, you can do state and airport name. So, like I said, we had Battle Creek. You can do BTL or KBTL. Hit search. And it'll bring up the diagram, and we'll talk about some of the stuff on here. But it's a PDF. You can open the PDF of it. You've got that. They do, they'll have revision like stuff, flag values if things have been revised and whatnot. It's also got effective date on there. We'll look at that here in just a second. So this current one on here was issued May 18th and it's valid through June 14th, 2023. So going back, whoop, that's not what I wanted to do. Going back to our slides. So they're updated every 28 days. That's where that effective. So you can see this one here. When I made the slideshow originally, it was back in 2018. I've updated since then, but that one was 24th of May 2018 to 21st of June 2018. So that would no longer be a valid diagram that you could use. Okay, it's outside the effective date. So they're updated every 28 days. So make sure you have the current diagram. When you're taxiing at an airport, these are typically what you're going to use as a road map or as a taxiway map. Key information, airport operation areas. When you say airport operation areas, it's referring to things like taxiways, runways, aprons, ramps. Basically, airport operation areas are the areas that airplanes or other vehicles can go. Okay, primarily where the aircraft can go. It also has this block up in the top that lists your different radio frequencies. Okay. And so radio frequencies, just a few here. This is like I told you, it was the Salt Lake City. The first one it's got there is ATIS. Who knows what ATIS is? ATIS. Automated. Something information, automated something information system. Not traffic. It's terminal. Automated terminal information system. Okay. And it does have weather on there. You've used it to find things like temperatures, barometric pressures. It'll have NOTAMs. What's a NOTAM? Notice to airmen, so things that are open or closed. Okay. Anything going on, restrictions, that kind of thing. What else does ADAS give you? What's that? METAR? The weather information? Yeah, so that's all part of weather. Pressure, altitude. What? The information revision. Information alpha, information bravo, information Charlie. So when ATIS gets updated, they'll issue a new letter. It's a rolling, they go through the alphabet. So like information bravo is current, right? And it'll give you the time. It also gives the time and when that ATIS information was issued. Okay, those aren't necessarily updated at a given time schedule. They're just updated when there's a change that warrants an update, right? It could be changes in weather, it could be a restriction that comes into place or is removed, that kind of thing. Oops. Other ones on there, we have Salt Lake, in this case, Salt Lake Tower, and there's a couple of those. If you look, there's actually 3 different tower frequencies. Okay, one's for runway 16 left, 34 right here. The other one is for runways 1432 and 1735. And then there's a third tower frequency for here. So bigger airports, they're going to split that control process into different areas. That's the tower frequency. They also have ground control, same thing. Okay, so ground control, there's ground control for the two general aviation runways, and then a separate ground control for the commercial runways, which are these two longer ones here, for instance. Okay. In Salt Lake City, we never went past this point here to the right, and general aviation airplanes were not allowed over here to the left. They kept it split. That's not the case everywhere. You go to Chicago and it's a big mess. So, but it was nice there. They kind of kept the small planes over there and the bigger planes over here. Yeah. We also didn't have any east-west runways, as you'll notice. Salt Lake City's in a valley that runs north and south. If you try to take off going east or west, you're going to smack into a mountainside. So everything runs north and south there, versus here where they go different directions. Hotspots. You can see these couple areas, and most of this is in black, white, or gray, but you have a few things in red. What do you think a hotspot is? Sun. What's that? Okay. So they often fall at junction points. It's not necessarily because it's a junction point, but they often fall at junction. What can occur at junction points that would make them a hotspot? You can have an incursion, okay? Places where you cross runways. What about down here? Why do you think this is a hotspot right here? The what? Two runways come together. What happens if you're planning on taking off on the 9,500-foot runway and you end up on the 4,800-foot runway? What's that? What happens if you're planning on using 7,000 feet to take off and you end up on the 4,800-foot runway? you end up crossing the longer one again, right? So that's why that's a hotspot, because it's easy to mix up. You don't want to end up on the wrong runway, for instance. But the big one that, from a maintenance taxi standpoint, is when you're going through areas like this is an approach end right here, right? But it's also like one of the main paths to go between this area, right? You can see where it'd be really easy to be taxiing through here and not realize something's coming into land on the end of that runway. So that can cause a runway incursion. Okay. You'll see them where taxiways cross runways, especially difficult ones, where it's easy to get mixed up. Sometimes there are places where you'll have like 3 or 4 taxiways come together, and it can get a little confusing there. You'll see building locations. This isn't accurate anymore. They've since knocked this terminal down. It doesn't even look like that anymore. Okay. So you've got the different buildings that are in black on here. Things like the terminal. They have hangars. This was the SkyWest hangar right here. This was the Delta hangar. Our fire station was right there. The tower. You got Cargo, FedEx, and UPS had buildings up here. Hangars. Air National Guard over here. They took this serious. You did not taxi into this ramp area. Every once in a while, you'd hear about someone from GA go taxi up there, and it was the whole security incident thing going on. It's kind of funny when you hear about it. Okay. Here's a little more complicated one. Denver. Okay, this one has east and west runways. It's laid out in kind of a square pattern. I'll talk about what it actually looks like. But taxiways are given letter names. So A, B, Alpha, Bravo, Charlie. Okay. WA, WB. When you get to, if you have enough taxiways that you run out of alphabet, you start doubling letters. Okay, you put letters together. I think here's WA right here. AS, double A, Mike. Golf runs all the way along the runway there. Delta. Okay. Turnoffs and minor taxiways are given a letter and a number. So we saw leaving the ramp out here. We had Alpha 1, Alpha 2, Alpha 3, Alpha 4, right? Those all enter from our ramp to the Alpha taxiway. Here you've got a runway that has a parallel taxiway labeled Bravo, and all these turnoffs are numbered. Bravo 2, Bravo 3, Bravo 4. I'm not sure. I think they just like, in case they want to add it later, that's where Bravo 5 and 6 could come from. Bravo 7, Bravo 8, Bravo 9, Bravo 10. Okay. So those are your minor taxiways that branch off. They're going to branch off of a taxiway with the same number, your same letter. And then we've got runways on here, the runway in black, taxiways in gray. So runways are given a name based on their heading. And it's the first 2 digits of the compass heading. Okay? So here we have runway 1735, for instance. What does that mean? Which way is this runway facing? So down here I've got 35, and you can see these, there's actually 35 left and 35 right, which is the next thing. But so if I'm sitting at the end of this runway, why is it called 35 or 35? Because your compass would be reading 35, roughly 350. It might be 351, might be 352, okay, but it's pretty close to, it's somewhere right around 350 degrees. Okay. What about if you're sitting up here at this end of it? Your reading's gonna, your compass will read what? About 170, 169, 171, right? So it's the first 2 numbers for that. And then here you can see they've got parallel runways. So if you're down here facing north, you're on runway 35, and if you're on this side, you're on the left. If you're on this side, you're 35 right. You can see it's reversed at the top. 35 left, if you're at the top and you're facing south, at the north end facing south, now that becomes the right runway, and this becomes the left runway. So it's based on the direction you are facing and which hand is which facing that direction. That make sense? I think I kind of confused myself on that one, but hopefully it was. So to help us know where we're at, we have different airport markings and signage that help to direct us to these different areas. So you can see here, I've got an excerpt from an airport diagram on the right. And on this diagram, you can see we're showing the end of runway 17 right. Okay. So here on the runway is a giant 17 right, 17R. There's also some signs here that show 17 right, 35 left. Okay. Now they put 17 right because we're at the north end where our compass would read 17 at 170. That's what comes first. If we were down at the opposite end down here, it would be 3517. Okay. It would be reversed because you'd be taxiing onto runway 35 at that point. So when we're out there, the markings, a little bit different than what you're used to on the road. So center lines of taxiways are solid yellow lines. And in areas where we want them to particularly stand out, you'll see what they got going on here is they've got the solid yellow line. It's on kind of the gray pavement. So they've painted black on either side to help them just show up better. It increases that contrast. If you have a blacktop surface, they rarely are going to paint. You know, it'll just be a yellow line on black. And there'll be large areas too, where if it's not as critical, it'll just be a yellow line on the gray pavement. But when they want to increase contrast, they'll put the black on each side of it. As you approach a runway, you'll still have your solid yellow line, but then it'll have these dashed lines on either side of it. And that's to give you a heads up that you're approaching what's called a hold short area. And primarily you're approaching a runway that you don't want to accidentally just taxi out onto without getting permission and clearance. Okay. Along the edges, you have double yellow lines. Okay. So when you're taxiing, you want to line the center of your airplane up with the single solid yellow line. You do not want to line it up with the double yellow lines. Double yellow lines at the edges. So anything on a taxiway is yellow lines. Okay, that's one way to know you're on the taxiway. The other is hopefully there's pavement underneath your airplane and not grass. well, grass strips, grass airports, but. The other thing is, as you get to, we have these dash lines on either side, right, that tell us we're getting to a hold short position. When we get to that hold short position, you have this line that's made up of 4 lines. 2 of them are solid, 2 of them are dashed. And that is that hold short position. That is the position, if you're taxiing towards this runway, you do not cross that hold short line until you have permission to enter or cross that runway. Okay. If you're at a controlled airport, you have to get that from either ground control or tower, depending on how things work. If you're at an uncontrolled airport, you're going to reach out on the what's called Unicom, Unified Communications Frequency, and you're going to make sure there isn't a plane coming into land that's going to end up on top of you. Okay. Or at the opposite end of the runway getting ready to take off. So if you see solid yellow lines, the 2 solid yellow lines, you do not cross without clearance. If you're on the side with the dashes, if you're coming from the runway, you are allowed to cross it in order to get clear of that runway. Now you still want to get clearance to take taxiways to get where you need to go, especially if you're at a controlled airport or a busier airport. If not, you need to reach out on what's called Unicom, which is a frequency that everybody's supposed to be listening to if you're at an uncontrolled airport. And you would tell everybody, hey, I'm going to go down taxiway alpha, so that somebody else isn't coming the other direction on taxiway alpha, and you end up playing a game of chicken. Airplanes don't go backwards very well. So you're pretty much stuck nose to nose if you got to find someone with a tug and some way to get you clear. Okay. At that mandatory hold position, we have those red background with white lettering that tells you which runway you're about to enter. Okay. So it's the runway identifier. So we know we're coming to runway 17R, 17 right, 35 left. Okay. So if this is 17R, 35 left, where's 17L, 35 right? Which way is it? That way or that way? Way number 1, way number 2. Way number 1, way number 2. Is 17 left? 17 left would be that direction. Yep, because remember, 17 is the direction our compass is pointing. The runway goes that way, okay? From this point. The runway goes down from this point. This is what it looks like from ground level. Different runway now, 1634. But here you can see our lines on the center line that are giving us a heads up. We're approaching a hold short position. We have our hold short lines right here. We've got our runway identifier. And then up ahead here would be the runway itself. Okay? Yeah. So that's what I was talking about. If you're on the side where it's got the solid lines towards you, you need to stop and get permission to cross. You know, if you're on the side where it's dashed, you can exit that active runway and get off onto the taxiway without necessarily having to ask for permission. Now, if you don't have clearance to continue taxiing from there, though, you would want to get kind of into the area where we're sitting now, but facing the other direction. And then you would want to find out from either ground control or tower, depending on how big of an airport, how many different people they have controlling it. You would want to find out from them which, get clearance to go on the taxiways. Okay. And I bring that up, ground control, tower control. There's also approach, which is the planes flying in. They different frequencies. Oftentimes you during busy daytime, you'll have different people working each of those frequencies. So Salt Lake City, there would be a ground control west, a ground control east, and a general aviation ground control. There'd be a tower control west, a tower control east, and a general aviation tower control during the day. At night, there was one person handling all of that. But you still would swap frequencies. They would be able to hear multiple frequencies at once. You would still need to be on the correct frequency depending on where you were on the airport. Okay. When you're getting that permission. As you're moving around, in order to help you navigate, we have that map. We have our airport diagram we can use as a map. But painted on the ground, you'll have informational signs that give you directional markings. So here, if you go straight ahead, you're going to continue on the Bravo taxiway. If you go off to the right, you're going to end up on the Alpha taxiway, the A taxiway. So that's what these black letters on a yellow background mean. And they show the direction. They can also be points of interest. Right here, we just show taxiways, but there are cases, we'll look at some signs that show points of interest that may say ramp. It may say ramp with an arrow. It may say apron with an arrow. It may even have a runway with an arrow, a runway identifier with an arrow, especially at those hot spots where it's easy to get confused. If we continue onto the runway now we see the white markings. So the center line of the runway, dashed white line, big dashes. Edge markings are solid white lines. So if you are taxiing, you think you're on a taxiway, and all of a sudden everything turns white, all your markings turn white, you're not in the right spot. You could be right in somebody's way who's about to land or about to take off. Okay. The touchdown zone is 3 large white dashes either side of the center line. Okay, and that's kind of what the planes on approach are kind of targeting for, although they typically don't hit right in that area. They're usually a little bit past it. Okay. But they're using that as a sight line. Okay. The runway identifier, the number, and the name giving you the heading, those first 2 digits. So here's 17 for 170, and then including your left center array. If you have 3 parallel runways, you'll have one will be left, one will be center, one will be right. I don't know, Jeremy, do you know anywhere that has more than 3 parallel runways? I can't. I've never seen a diagram of a place that does. There might be an airport out there. I'm not quite sure how they would identify it, but usually, even if they're parallel, like Salt Lake City, you saw, they're not exactly parallel. They're slightly different angles, and so then they have a different identifier. Opposite compass on the end. So there's the 2 ends. There's our real short runway. Right? It's our 50-foot runway. Right? So the north end up here with the south-facing heading, the south end down here with the north-facing heading. Down here at the bottom, here's one. You got to be a little careful with these. Is that a 9 or a 6? So over here is 27. What would the opposite of 27 be on the compass? 90. Okay, it's looking at it as though you're about to come onto the runway. Okay, so you're looking at it from this direction. Okay, kind of like you can see that end you're looking at from all those other ones. It's the direction you're looking when you're sitting at that end of the runway, pointed with your nose pointed in that direction. Okay. If you have a closed area, it's going to be marked with X's. You'll get to see this summer. Anyone ever been out here for the air show? Where they set the fair up? You ever walk around on the runways and taxiways during the air show? So the runways and taxiways over here, over by Duncan and all that, that's where they set up like the fairgrounds. And the food trucks and So you'll see they've got these big wood yellow X's with lights that they plop on the runway and on the taxiway so that people don't go over there. And it's all closed down and being used for that. They can be temporary in that case, or if they can be painted on if something's permanently closed or closed for a long time. Back in the late 90s, early 2000s, there was a corporate airport right off of Chicago called Meigs Field. And the mayor of Chicago really didn't like it for some reason. In the middle of the night, he sent bulldozers out and they bulldozed X's in the runway. No regard for the fact that there were a whole bunch of corporate jets parked at the airport that night. It took like 6 months for them to get permission for them to take off the taxiway. There were some companies that were not happy. They don't like having their $70 million jet stuck on a island airport right outside of Chicago, right on the Chicago waterfront. But yeah, it was April. I think it was in April 1st they did it. I think it was on April 1st. But yeah, no. It used to be back in the day, early, like Microsoft Flight Simulator, I had 98. That was the default airport where you started, was Meigs Field. If you loaded it, like the first time you loaded it, you were in a Cessna 172 at Meigs Field. And it was Daley, right? Mayor Daley, Chicago. I don't know. The Chicago mayor didn't like it. He thought it should be a public park. And so he sent bulldozers out in the middle of the night, no regard for the corporate airplanes. It used to be like the main corporate, it's right by downtown if you had a, you want to get to your corporate jet quickly. I want to bring up, I'm going to slide back real quick because not only will it be on those, let me find my Salt Lake City map here. That's Denver. There we go. You can see Salt Lake City even on the airport diagram. There's taxiways right here that have X's on them. That's not taxiway X-ray. There is no such thing as taxiway X-ray. There will never be a taxiway labeled taxiway X. If it's a taxiway labeled X like that, it means it's permanently closed. Or temporary. It could be temporary or permanently closed. That's a permanently closed taxiway. The concrete's still there, but they don't use it anymore. It's not maintained, so. Okay, let's jump back ahead here. Where were we? For the big yellow X, and we'll call it. There we go. Okay. Other signs, there are other kind of informational and what are called mandatory signs out there we got to pay attention to. Sorry, now airport signs that we got to pay attention to instead of markings. So the hold position is also indicated by a sign in addition to a hold short. Our airport identifier, our hold short line. We've got signs that are in the grass here on the side. You can see it kind of circled. So red sign with white lettering. Okay. Looks something like that. Shows the runway name and it's roughly parallel to the hold short line. Okay. So they really want you to know. If you're at the very, very end of the runway, what's called the approach end of the runway, it'll have the runway number with approach without the opposite end on it. So you can see this is where it kind of comes in right to the edge here. Okay, 15-approach. So if you want to make sure you're right at the very end of a runway, you would come in where it says approach rather than, in this case, let's see, 15. The opposite 15 would be 150, 240, 330, 15, 330, right? Does that sound right? The opposite end of runway 15? Maybe 330? Yeah. You'll see these in places. This is no entry, particularly aircraft. No entry for aircraft. Okay. It doesn't necessarily mean vehicles. Okay, it's not a do not enter for a vehicle. We had roads going around the Salt Lake airport and other airports I worked at. They had these signs at the entrance from where it went from like ramp area to road because they didn't want a plane like taxiing onto the road. Onto the vehicle. Wasn't really wide enough for anything, but you didn't want anything going there. So it could be a one-way taxiway as well. Okay, most taxiways are bidirectional. They'll go two ways. Now, towers, controls, they will often establish a direction they send you, but that's not guaranteed. But then vehicular roads are that. So, here's that Salt Lake Airport again. We had taxiways like Alpha and Bravo right here that both paralleled the runways, or Golf and Hotel on the other runways. So oftentimes Bravo would be the northbound taxiway, Alpha would be the southbound taxiway, but that's just because that's how ground control would route you. Okay. Same thing here, there was Echo and Foxtrot. Typically Echo was the eastbound and Foxtrot was the westbound taxiway. But again, that's just because they were routed that way. You could go either direction depending on which way you got routed by ground control. Okay. So airport signs then are going to tell you where you're at. So these are kind of like the markings. We want to know where we're currently located and where we're going to go. Okay, so they're going to tell you where you're currently located, the taxiway or runway. They're going to tell you where going straight ahead. And so these are black signs with yellow writing and yellow outlines. So if we look at what these look like, here is the actual aerial view of the taxiway and the runway. Here's the airport diagram version of it. And if we kind of zoom in on this end right here, you can see if we're on the Alpha taxiway, there would be signs along the side of it that tell you you're on the Alpha taxiway. Here's what I was talking about. Here's Alpha, here's Bravo. You can see the planes are going north on Bravo. Alpha is typically the southbound taxiway. It's that whole right, like we drive on the right side of the road, right? So often if you have two parallel taxiways, that's how they're operated, but it's not guaranteed to always be that way. Okay. So black sign, this is telling you where you are currently located. Okay. Black sign, yellow writing, this is what you're currently located on. And if you keep going straight ahead, what you're going to stay on. Okay. If you're on a runway, it's going to have the number. Right? So if you're facing, direction 220, that's the number you're going to see. So you're facing southwest here and runway 22. If you see yellow background with black writing, this is telling you which way something is, how to get towards something. It's a directional sign. Direction to a taxiway, runway, or other point of interest. So yellow sign with black. Black sign, yellow writing, this is where you are. Yellow sign with black writing, this is where you're going. Or this is pointing towards something you want to go to. So here's an example where it can tell you, information, not just taxiways, but it can also show you where a runway is. It can show you where the FBO is. It can show you where sometimes they'll just say fuel, if you're looking for where the fuel farm is. Apron, ramp, and that kind of thing. And oftentimes these will be combined. So here's an example where the plane is on taxiway Alpha, and Alpha continues but kind of jogs off to the right, and then it has an intersecting taxiway Charlie going left and right. Okay? So again, black background, yellow letter, that's where you currently are. Yellow background, black letter, black arrow, that's where you're going to go if you go that direction. Questions on signs before we get into radios?